going to mention in 9 minutes 10 important trends that affect economic affairs and business from geopolitical developments. The first is structurally higher inflation. Many central bankers elsewhere in the world, we know the ones here are very wise in Norway, but there are some who may think inflation will more easily go back to what they desire it to be than it actually will, because there are so many fundamentally inflationary factors in the geopolitical situation that I have described on supply chain as well as energy transition being inherently inflationary and accelerating all over the world. The second is the emergence of politicized energy strategies, particularly around the Western world. Instead of it being market forces and market prices, the United States and the UK sign a deal to ship so much LNG to Britain, that much of which will then go into Europe. The United States phones up Qatar and says, send some LNG to Europe. There is a coordination to it that has changed the energy flows of the world in the wake of the Ukraine crisis. The third important trend is critical minerals are going the same way. And instead of, again, it being market forces that sort out who owns the supplies of critical minerals and their flows in the world, in almost every Western government now, there is the adoption of critical minerals strategies, critical minerals clubs with other countries, joint minerals partnerships with African countries, and that will lead to lithium refineries in unexpected places and state-backed Western ownership of mining operations that wouldn't have happened in that normal world where China was happily controlling a lot of this, and that is an important change. The fourth effect is much higher defense expenditure for the long term, really much higher, nearly doubling in Japan, hugely higher in Germany if they can work out how to spend the money. Really, defense industry is booming in this environment with a major arms race taking place across the Indo-Pacific. The fifth is a reevaluation of ESG. And you can see the debate about that in the United States, about the merits of it. There's a cultural divide about it in the United States. But the geopolitical crisis has affected the views, even of the British government approving a coal mine recently that they would not have done 3 years ago. New oil and gas licenses in the North Sea that they would not otherwise have proceeded with. So there's a different view about what ESG really means. The sixth effect is a decline in global governance. There is global governance on climate change or on the ozone layer, but there is no global governance on controlling artificial intelligence, on the governance of space, where it is the Wild West up there now, with thousands of satellites going up without any legal framework after the Outer Space Treaty of 1967. And there is a threat of chaos up there above the skies. Or in all of these areas, which have now started to have major business implications, there's an absence of global governance, but a race between the US and its allies and China to set global standards. The seventh trend in the absence of global governance is the rise of powerful new networks of cooperation, such as the AUKUS alliance of Australia, the UK, and the US, that involves billions of pounds extra investment in nuclear submarine building in the UK, but is going to move on to hypersonic missiles, onto undersea drones, and other networks are becoming more meaningful in their technological and economic dimension. The Quad, for instance, of India, Japan, Australia, and the United States. The European political community has been created. I mentioned Israel and the Gulf states. And on the other side, China, Russia, and Iran. These networks, some of which overlap with each other, are playing a bigger role in world affairs. The eighth effect is the decoupling in certain respects between the US and China. Obviously, already happened on 5G. Now it is happening on semiconductors. It will also happen on critical minerals. Watch out for it happening on active pharmaceutical ingredients on which the West is critically dependent on China and would be very vulnerable in a crisis, and people have suddenly woken up to this fact. And of course, such a decoupling starts to affect professional services and finance because of it will inevitably spread to supporting services. Not the end of globalization, but a change in globalization, and certainly a decoupling. The ninth trend is resilience has become much more important. Governments didn't used to worry about resilience in that normal world for 25 years. They just had a one risk meeting a year and ticked the boxes, and that was the end of that. Now they're all starting to plan the next pandemic. How can they make their vaccines? Where are the sources of supply? How can they keep their defense industries going in a difficult situation? Resilience is back as a political subject. And the 10th trend, which is the only really positive one here, is state sponsorship of innovation that is hugely incentivized. And here's the exciting and the frightening part. I keep going on programs where they say, should we be afraid of artificial intelligence or should we be excited about it? And I say, well, this is like if you were sitting on the Apollo 11 rocket, in 1969 going to the moon, you would be afraid, wouldn't you? Yes. And you would be excited, wouldn't you? Yes. You should be afraid and excited. Those two things are not mutually exclusive, because you would be sitting on the Apollo 11 rocket on something that is going to accelerate rapidly. And that will bring fear and excitement. Of course, it means you have to steer it well. You have to know what you're doing. You have to prepare for it if the excitement is going to be better than the fear. But that is now the situation we're in. We're approaching the fastest period of technological change in the whole history of human civilization because of the combination of many things, the convergence of recently invented technologies, partly because of COVID, particularly because of competition between strong geopolitical powers, where the United States and China cannot afford to be behind the other one in the development of AI and quantum technologies and many other new things. And because we're entering an age where, having harnessed physics and chemistry for an industrial revolution over the last 200 years, we are about to harness biology as a major instrument of growth and how we manage the world, and this we have not done before. So all of these things lead to an extraordinary period of transformation. And that means, to my final point, that the countries that will really succeed in this are those that combine a climate of innovation with a supply of talent and the availability of capital. And that is always my mental framework for looking at a country now. Are they a home of innovation? Do they have a supply of talent and availability of capital? And then mark them out of 3 for that. The United States scores 3 out of 3. That is why it is still the power, the home of the tech companies, the big growing economy of the world, a more powerful nation relative to its allies than it was before. China scores maybe 2.5 out of 3. That is why it is the big rival. European countries score, well, they vary, but maybe 1.5 out of 3, or 3 halves out of 3 in some of those respects. That is why it's a bigger struggle to keep up with the US and China. So now we are in an age where things can move as quickly as when that ice shelf collapsed in 6150 BC, and where AI and climate change are coming along as the 2 biggest issues of our lifetime, and in which we have these 3 fault lines and 10 trends to cope with at the same time. I hope that sets the scene for our meeting today. Thank you very much indeed.